welcome to episode 17 of the True Crime Grapple podcast. I'm your host Dan, and it's awesome to have you back here with me again for another dose of true crime. Now, a week ago we released part 1 of the Bath School massacre, so if you haven't heard that yet, please stop listening to this one and go back and listen to part 1, that's episode 16. If you're new to the show, welcome, and be sure to click the subscribe button so that you can get all the shows on your device as soon as they drop. Now, I've been noticing a few new listeners coming over and joining our Facebook page. If you're not already involved, then what are you waiting for? Come on over and find us on Facebook and Instagram at True Crime Grapple or on Twitter at TCG3682 and join us. Now, I mentioned at the end of last week's show that there's now a YouTube channel for us, which is a work in progress. Episodes are getting put on there whenever I've got the chance, but you can find the channel by searching for True Crime Grapple on YouTube. That's our housekeeping done for now, and it's time to pick the story back up. We'll start it a little before we left off the last episode, but before then I'll just give you a warning, as I did in the first episode, that this episode is going to feature and detail information about tragedy against children, as well as adults and animals, so please consider that before going forward if it's going to be a problem for you. Episode written by Jim Pitts, music and editing by BaBaBeats, and narrated by me. Okay, that's it. The wait is over. It's time for your fix. So lock that door, sit back and relax, because it is true crime time. It's true crime time. Hike arrived at the Smith house and asked Frank's wife Leonie if they could accommodate more of the injured. She readily agreed and went upstairs to ready more rooms, while Hike went back to the school to help. He approached the school about the same time that Kehoe pulled up in his truck. Kehoe called Hike over, and the superintendent understandably obliged. Hike knew he needed to inform the school board member of the situation. He also asked Kehoe if he could borrow his truck for the rescue efforts. Kehoe strangely replied, quote, "Alright, I'll take you with me." Hike, noticing the gun and dynamite, realised that Kehoe knew something about the tragedy. Kehoe fired the gun into the dynamite, and the second bomb exploded, sending all the rusted scraps of metal, tools, nuts, bolts and nails piled in the truck as shrapnel through the air in a wild circle around the Ford truck. Across the street, Leonie Smith heard the second explosion and went outside. She noticed some crumpled clothing in the corner of her flower garden. As she approached the garden, she realised it was a large part of a human body, bloody and mangled beyond recognition. In one of the pockets, she found some papers from the Lilly State Bank of Tecumseh that belonged to Andrew Kehoe and his driver's licence. Nearby, young Cleo Clayton, the second grader who survived the initial blast by jumping through a window, was walking in a daze when the second bomb went off. A piece of shrapnel ripped through his body before lodging in his spine. Somehow, he was still alive, but barely. Anna Peroni was hit by 2 pieces of shrapnel but managed to shield her 2 young children. 6th grader Stephen Stavisky, who was laying in the street with 2 broken legs from the first blast, was hit in the arm. FM Fritz, who would lose a 9-year-old daughter on the first blast, was hit by a bolt in his chest just above his heart that would ricochet off his bones, fracturing his arm. Thelma Medkoff, only 50 feet from the truck, was hit in her legs by 3 pieces of shrapnel. Closer to the truck, the outcomes were even more horrendous. Retired farmer Nelson McFarren was killed instantly, Wowie's son-in-law and Frank Smith's brother, 33-year-old postmaster Glenn Smith, had the left side of his body totally mangled. His leg was completely blown away from his body. He would soon die, despite the immediate efforts of a local veterinarian and others. After being injured in both blasts, Cleo Clayton would die 7 hours later. Carlton Hollister would wake up in the telephone exchange office, not knowing what had happened or how he got there. He heard Lenore Babcock repeat her message over and over. Slowly, he realised what had happened, but he had no idea how he survived. He also didn't know that the man who rescued him was now dead. Nellie and Albert Cushman frantically searched for their son Ralph. Their daughter Josephine found him and got into the car. They asked her about Ralph, but she told them that she knew he hadn't come out yet. Josephine then felt a pain in her leg, and she realised she'd been hit by shrapnel from the second blast. On a hill near the rubble that used to be the North Wing, Mrs. Eugene Hart sat with 3 of her 5 children. Daughters Isla and Vivian laid lifeless at her side, while her son Percy, bleeding profusely, was dying in her arms. Unknown to her, her oldest son Perry, the 17-year-old dropout, was nearby on the ground in intense pain, his ankle shredded by shrapnel from the second explosion. In Lansing, at the Edward W. Sparrow Hospital, doctors and nurses braced themselves for the horror that was coming. Just after the initial explosion, they were giving a warning. Stand by. Explosion. School. Children. Ambulances arrived carrying stretchers of dust-covered children with pieces of metal sticking out from wounds, multiple bone fractures, deep lacerations, missing hands and missing feet. Teacher Balance Hart was brought in, her body mangled such that a nurse remarked, quote, "She's really blown apart." Doctors who had treated the carnage of the Great War a decade before were stunned seeing the young bodies torn apart. Back at the school, rescue efforts continued, but were difficult for the volunteers. William Clock, a sheriff's deputy from a nearby county, found a youngster lying in the rubble, unconscious but alive. As Clock moved to get the child, a brick wall collapsed and crushed the boy, while Clock himself barely got out of the way. Clock then found the legs of a female student sticking out of the rubble. As he reached for the girl's foot, it snapped off in his hands. One rescuer saw a strange stick laying on the ground. He discovered it was a human backbone. Students Claire Gates and Howard Cushman, both knocked over in the initial explosion, ran back to the school after hearing the screams of the injured. They dug out numerous children, including one who was missing a leg. Hazel Weatherby, the teacher who grabbed 2 students to shield them after the blast, was found sticking out of a pile of bricks, alive, but holding 2 dead students. After rescuers lifted the dead children from her arms, her injuries caught up to her, and she quietly passed away. Rescuers poured in from neighbouring cities and towns throughout central Michigan. Firefighters, both professional and volunteer, students from Michigan State College, automobile factory workers, construction workers all came to help. Also coming to town were thousands of people wanting to see the destruction, One such man snuck through the crowd and made his way to what was left of Kehoe's truck. He took a piece of intestine off the steering column, put it in a jar, and disappeared. Albert Detloff found a bloody mass of what looked to be a human body. Detloff recognised the checkered coat of Superintendent E.E. Hike. As the bodies at the temporary morgue increased, so did parents apprehensively looking for their missing children. One father found his lifeless son, Billy, and then returned to the rescue efforts. In the basement, Clock and Captain John O'Brien, a Lansing police officer, saw debris falling from the ceiling, so they carefully moved toward the coal room. Under the debris, they found dynamite connected to a wire. A painful decision was made to stop all rescue efforts. It was too dangerous after the discovery of the unexploded dynamite. Recovery efforts changed to dynamite removal. A total of 504 pounds of dynamite and pyrotol, 10 blasting caps, 2 batteries, and 2 timing devices were found from the collapsed north wing to the south wing. Had the dynamite exploded as expected, the school would have been completely destroyed, with all the students either dead or severely injured. By some miracle, only 100 pounds of the dynamite exploded. Experts believed that despite all of his careful planning and electrical knowledge, Andrew Kehoe made a fortunate error. The 2 batteries didn't have enough power for the 2 remaining timing devices. Although no one felt like it, the town of Bath was lucky that the disaster wasn't much worse. Reporters descended upon the small town as publishers and newsreel producers wanted the fastest technology to get details out to the newspaper readers and movie patrons. Airplanes would land in nearby farms, allowing news to get out to the world quickly, allowing newspapers to get out special editions that evening. The public had first-hand details in newspapers within a matter of hours instead of days. Moviegoers were able to see newsreels of the schoolhouse ruins by the next night. In addition to the frantic search and rescue efforts, authorities quickly launched a criminal investigation under the jurisdiction of County Prosecutor William Searle. Even early on, one name kept popping up in the investigation: Andrew Kehoe. Searle knew Kehoe. Searle's father had represented him in a recent mortgage dispute. Both men had a hard time believing that Kehoe was responsible. One of Searle's first responsibilities was getting the unidentified bodies moved from the temporary morgue next to the school to the community hall. This would help not only the parents in finding their loved ones, but it would also give them some privacy. More importantly, Searle called for an inquest to commence the next day to learn the facts of what exactly happened. Potential jurors for the inquest were pulled from the rescuers and bystanders at the site. The search for the survivors continued slowly and methodically. In each area, workers made sure that they found the victims before moving on to the next area. Ava Sweet and Lillian Welch, still trapped under the rubble, heard the workers above. They also heard one of them say it was time to move on to another area. Fearful they would be left to die, both girls started screaming with all the energy they had left. Rescuers immediately returned and started digging. Eventually, Both girls were pulled out alive. Ava's brother, Dean, was crushed by the initial blast. When he was found, his crushed body didn't have a pulse. He was carefully moved to the temporary morgue where a sheet was placed over him. Hours later, a neighbour was looking at his body when she realised Dean was moving his toes. Due to the lack of ambulances at that time, Dean Sweet was rushed to the hospital in a hearse. Joseph Dunback, the lawyer for the Price estate, followed the news coming out of Bath closely. He was another one who could not believe that Kehoe was involved. When he got back to his law office that afternoon, he was immediately met by Nellie's three sisters. They were wanting his help in finding Nellie. Dunback drove the sisters to the friend's house in Jackson where Kehoe said Nellie was staying. To their dismay, the friends told them they hadn't seen Nellie or her husband. The sisters realised that no one had seen Nellie since Andrew brought her home on Monday night. Elizabeth, Genevieve and Loretta stopped and prayed for their sister Nellie. By the late afternoon, Mr. and Mrs. Cushman, with their injured daughter Josephine, paced the sidewalks still searching for their son Ralph. Lloyd Curtis, a 19-year-old from Lansing, became a volunteer ambulance driver that day. He spent most that Wednesday alternating between trips to the hospitals and trips to the funeral homes. When Lloyd wasn't driving victims, he would help pick up debris, such as metal, plaster, bricks and wood. He also carried around a 5-gallon bucket to pick up pieces of children's fingers, legs, feet, hands, and skulls. The Governor of Michigan, Fred W. Greene, and his wife arrived at the school in early afternoon. The new governor, overwhelmed by the scene, promised state aid would be coming soon. He then rolled up his sleeves and began to move bricks. C.E. Lamb, a farmer who also served as the county's coroner, was overcome by the amount of work he had to do because of the carnage. Prosecutor Searle and Sheriff Fox helped Lamb with the arduous task of identifying the bodies. School employee Mattie Smith used the school census to help identify the bodies. The Cushman family was still searching for Ralph at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. A volunteer from the community hall approached them, telling the family they were needed at the morgue. When they arrived, it looked like a field hospital from the Great War. Puddles of blood on the floor, stains of blood on women's dresses, and blood seeping through the sheets covering the dead. When Andrew, Nellie and Josephine Cushman were taken to Ralph's body, they weren't prepared for what they saw. Ralph's head looked like it had exploded, and his chin was missing. Shards of metal was embedded in his skin. Rescuers told the family that when he was found, he was still sitting in his third-grade desk, next to another boy who also didn't make it. At the Kehoe farm, almost everything had been destroyed, except for a chicken coop that remained standing, the result of another failed, unexploded bomb. Authorities noticed shade trees had been cut down and grapevines were cut off but meticulously put back in place so not to be noticed. Inside what was left of the barn, investigators found the remains of 2 horses burned to the skeleton. To prevent the animals from escaping, Kehoe bound their feet with wire. Outside on a fence, investigators found Kehoe's last known message, A small wooden sign with just 5 words stenciled on it that read, "Criminals are made, not born." East of Bath was the town of Langsburg, on the same rail line as Bath and Lansing. On the train that day was a package mistakenly put on the Langsburg train instead of the Lansing train. Station officials noticed it was addressed to Clyde Smith, the insurance agent in Lansing. They were horrified when they saw the return address was marked with Andrew Kehoe. Their terror was even greater when they read the markings on the side that read, "High explosives, dangerous." State officials came to collect the box and take it back to Lansing, where they would unseal it the next day. Also taken to Lansing was Ava Sweet, who was rushed to the hospital after being rescued. With only minor injuries, she was released to an aunt. Out of 26 students in our class, when Wednesday, May 18th began, only 13 survived to see the dawn of Thursday, May 19th. She still didn't know what had happened to her brother Dean. By Thursday, when the shock of what had happened had worn off for most people, the hard work was to begin, and it wasn't cheap. Medical supplies were needed. Many parents could not afford the funerals. Rubble and debris had to be cleared, and Bath Consolidated needed a new school. The school still owed over $40,000, but only had $188 in its general fund. Governor Green offered to pay the funerals of the students whose parents could not afford a proper burial. Green also created the Bath Fund and appointed a committee to solicit and receive funds to assist in relief work and build a new school building. Individuals sent money orders, cash and cheques, and businesses took up collections, and even school children brought in their nickels and pennies. Monies also came in from other countries as well as some unusual places. A group of murderers, rapists and thieves at Ionia prison collected $200 for a donation. Children with tuberculosis raised another $17.80. Michigan Senator James Couzens, the former mayor of Detroit, was deeply affected by the tragedy in Bath. He too knew the loss of a child, as he and his wife had lost 2 of their 4 children tragically. As a result, the Couzens donated large sums of money to the children's causes. Some years earlier, Couzens, an early investor in Ford, sold his interest in the company back to the Ford family for more than $30 million, around $500 million in today's money. Couzens told the governor he would pay any amount for the financial interests of the parents who lost their children or in the rebuilding of the school. The formal inquest was scheduled to start at 9 o'clock in the morning, barely 24 hours after the bombing. Fortunately, Searle realised it wasn't appropriate and rescheduled it for the following Monday. Thursday was to be a day of commencement exercises for Bath seniors. Needless to say, but the exercises were rightly cancelled. Instead, students received their diplomas without a formal ceremony or fanfare. Throughout the town, lawmen searched for anything that looked like a wired alarm clock or dynamite out of here that Kehoe left other bombs. Fortunately, no more bombs were found. The package Kehoe sent on Wednesday morning to Lansing was carefully opened by state police. Again, no bomb was found, only some ledgers and a note. The note read, "Dear Sir, I am leaving the school board and turning over to you all of my accounts. They are all in this box. Due to an uncashed cheque, the back had 22 cents more than my books showed when I took them over. Due to an error on the part of the secretary in order number 118, dated November 18th, 1925, he changed the figures on the order after the cheque had been sent to the payee. The bank gained 1 more cent over in my books, making the bank account show 23 cents more than my books. Otherwise, I'm sure you'll find my books exactly right. Sincerely yours, A.P. Kehoe." Even in death, Kehoe proved himself to be meticulous with the school's money. Out of the Kehoe farm, investigators searched the area. Nellie Kehoe had yet to be found. Rookie police officer George Carpenter of Michigan State Police was assigned to Kehoe's farm. During a mid-morning cigarette break, Carpenter and his partner chose a place near the chicken coop. They noticed an odd-looking cart. Carpenter went for a closer look and found the answer to the last major mystery: the body of Nellie Kehoe. Her arms were broken, feet were burned away, and her skull was cracked at the forehead. Personal items were carefully placed around her. Silverware, a gold watch, rights, teaspoons, a metal box. Inside the box, authorities found her marriage licence, bills from the hospitals, and possible Liberty bonds left over from the Great War. The thousands of sightseers continued Thursday and all through the weekend in a non-stop parade of automobiles, as police officers had to be switched from rescue and recovery to traffic control. One officer counted 2,750 autos pass by him in just 2 hours. On Sunday, it was estimated that 85,000 automobiles came through Bath. One popular sight was the roped-off cart where Nellie's body would found, and people would reach out and touch the large wheels. By Friday, a new normal began to emerge as the citizens of Bath had to continue with the day-to-day details of their lives while making plans to reshape the future. Before they could move on, the folks of Bath had to grieve for their losses. Friday began the first of many, many funerals in Bath. No one knew how to handle so many funerals. Logistically, how do you plan for over 40 funerals at the same time? One early suggestion was to hold a communal funeral service for the children, but it was decided it wasn't practical to do so. There was too many details to coordinate. One funeral parlour in Bath couldn't handle all the work, as each body required patience and attention to detail, both of which took time. Extra gravediggers were needed at Pleasant Hill Cemetery, and there weren't enough pallbearers for all of the funerals. Usually the Reverend Scott MacDonald officiated the funerals in Bath, but he had lost a daughter, 8-year-old Thelma. On Friday, she was one of the first to be buried. For the families to attend other funerals, the services were held in shifts in the mornings and afternoons. On Friday, there were 11 funerals, including Emroy Hike. On Saturday, there were 19 funerals, including 2 sets of siblings and a teacher. On Sunday, there were 11 funerals, including the one for the 3 Hart children. Appropriately around this time, one Lansing newspaper referred to Bath as a valley of tears. The Hart family suffered the greatest loss in Bath that week, with 3 dead children and another fighting for his life in hospital. After the funeral on Sunday, the family took out an announcement in a local newspaper. Quote, "We desire to express our heartfelt thanks to our many friends and neighbours, to our Governor and Mrs. Green, to all women's societies, to the doctors and nurses and the Red Cross, to our police of Lansing and the state, to our businessmen of Lansing and all neighbouring cities and towns, to unknown friends and sympathisers in other states and cities, in general, to all nearby and far who aided and comforted us in this, the dark hour of our lives. Mr. and Mrs. Eugene Hart of Bath, Michigan." Another service was held on Friday as a Catholic Mass was held for Nellie Price Kehoe in Lansing. On the way into church, family members exchanged words with the newspaper photographers. More words were exchanged after the Mass when the family members crossed the street and confronted the media. Nellie was buried in the Price family plot in Lansing Mount Hope Cemetery with the name Ellen A. Price. Hours earlier, Andrew Kehoe was laid to rest in the Potter section of a different Mount Hope cemetery in a casket purchased by his sister. Gravediggers dug 3 unmarked graves to prevent vandalism. Only a few people attended his service. One sister, his only brother, and a few old friends, plus a newspaper reporter who had stalked out the site for hours. None of the mourners got out of their automobiles at the gravesite. Friday was the date of the next school board meeting, and the business of the school had to resume. One of the first duties was to appoint a new treasurer. An offer was made to former board member J.W. Webster, but he respectfully declined because the shockwaves from the blast destroyed 24,000 eggs and incubators on his chicken farm. The next offer was to Enos Peacock, the man Kehoe defeated in the 1924 election. Peacock agreed and came to the meeting. Liability of the school board and the disaster was the next topic discussed. The board decided to wait for the results of the inquest before proceeding. Funding the rebuild was another problem. Due to the debt from the original construction, a dire financial crisis was looming over the district unless monetary help came from the state. There was also the question of what to do with the property. Should the school be rebuilt, or should the remaining structure be torn down? Should the property be turned into a memorial park, and where to build the new school? A new superintendent, Harry Brand, was approved. Hike had sometime earlier in the year resigned his position and Brandt was hired. The board postponed the hiring of 2 new teachers. The formal inquest started that Monday. 6 jurors were sworn in, the same 6 men that William Searle had selected on a Wednesday at the bombing site. All 6 were selected because of their highly respected status within the community and because each man had no children. More than 50 witnesses were called over the next 2 days, including surviving students and employees, board members, rescue workers, and neighbours of the Kehoes. It didn't take the jurors long to issue their findings. At the end, they wrote, quote, "We find that said Andrew P. Kehoe was sane at all times, and so conducted and concealed his operations that there was no cause to suspicion any of the above acts, and we further find that the school board and Frank Smith, janitor of said school building, were not negligent in and about their duties, and were not guilty of any negligence in discovering said plan." Officially, they ruled Kehoe was responsible for the murder of E. Hike, the only murder the inquiry was charged with investigating. Everyone knew this meant he was responsible for the deaths of 43 people. Kehoe's death was ruled a suicide. Sympathy for Bath came from all over the world. A student in Pesaro, Italy wrote, quote, "We want you to know that all of Italy is sympathising in your tears." Not everyone expressed great sympathy for the events in Bath. The Ku Klux Klan claimed that Andrew Kehoe's Catholic upbringing was the root cause of his actions. The Klan was gaining in popularity again, promoting a fear of blacks, Jews, Catholics and immigrants. Supposedly 5 million copies of the Klan's flyer were distributed, detailing Kehoe's Catholicism and claiming Catholics were the enemies of the public schools. The flyer was long on fear-mongering and short on facts. 1 month after the bombing, Senator Cousins toured the ruins and visited with some of the children still in hospital in Lansing. Cousins announced he would personally fund the rebuilding of the Bath Consolidated School on the same site as the previous school. For 2 days, the story of the Bath School massacre dominated the headlines around the world, but it would be quickly knocked from the headlines just as quickly as it appeared. 2 days after the bombing, Michigan-born Charles Lindbergh took off from Long Island heading towards France. Some 33 hours later, when Lindbergh landed in Paris, becoming the first man to fly solo across the Atlantic, he was a world hero. Also, an earthquake in China killed more than 200,000 people. Lindbergh's return to the States was celebrated with a ticker tape parade in New York in June. 2 anarchists known as Sacco and Vanzetti dominated the crime headlines until the duo was executed in August. And just like that, the story of Bath Consolidated School Massacre became old news and was eventually forgotten. But not in Bath. The tragedy was still very much a part of everyone's life throughout the summer. Dean Sweet remained in a coma for 2 weeks. Doctors feared that his chest wounds would cause his heart to stop at any time. Even though it was during the time of Prohibition, doctors gave the young boys sips of whiskey in an effort to maintain a steady heart rhythm. The whiskey worked, and Dean came out of his coma. 1 day after the bombing, doctors feared 5 more students could join the list of the dead, with their wounds seeming too severe to survive. All 5 students, Josephine England, Florence Hunter, Donald Huffman, Helen Combe, and Gail Stapleton, all miraculously survived and were all released from hospital by the end of the summer. After 4 months in the hospital, doctors still weren't sure if Petty Hart's foot would survive. Doctors feared infections, swelling and gangrene would cause him to lose his foot. He was in a great amount of pain, but he never complained. Out of 4 siblings in the Hart household, he was the only one to survive. When Beatrice Gibbs arrived at the hospital on May 18th, doctors thought they were going to lose her. She was brought in with both legs broken in 2 places. Her right leg and her head were sliced open, a broken arm, and a shattered elbow. For 5 days, doctors feared she would die. But she didn't, and her recovery was a ray of hope for the people in Bath. Over the next 3 months, and despite excruciating pain, she made remarkable progress. Doctors decided to do surgery on her hip to remove a splinter that caused much of her pain on August 22nd. Her body couldn't survive the surgery, and Beatrice died the next day, becoming the 44th victim of Andrew Kehoe. Dean Sweet was eventually sent home, but with strict orders not to do anything strenuous, not even walking. Doctors told his parents not to expect him to live past 3 more years. As a result, his parents wouldn't let him go outside. He was forced to sit in a chair day after day, only his sister, Ava, to play with. One day, he took a chance and sneaked outside and went for a walk. His dad pleaded for him to come back inside, but Dean refused. When Dean was in his late 80s, he told a reporter that that was the day he started getting well again. Dean would go on to help start the Bath Volunteer Fire Department, and with his wife of 64 years, have 3 children. He would eventually pass away at the age of 91 in 2006. In terms of numbers, on May 18th, 1927, the 3rd grade had 16 students, 10 died and 3 injured. The 4th grade had 21 students, 7 died and 11 were injured. The 5th grade had 24 students, 7 died and 8 were injured. The 6th grade had 28 students, 13 died and 11 were injured. Additionally, 1 2nd grader, 2 teachers, the superintendent, 2 bystanders and Nellie, for a total of 44 deaths. The deadliest act of school violence in United States history. According to the Red Cross, 80 people were injured that day. 1 out of every 7 students in Bath perished. Many local residents refused to include Kehoe as one of the deaths. 1 more student died almost a year later, indirectly from his injuries suffered that day. Due to the injuries he suffered in the blast, Richard Fritz died from an infection that caused myocarditis, an inflammation of his heart. Richard is not included on the official death list, since his death is not directly from the injuries. Throughout the summer, debris was slowly cleared from the school site by volunteers, including children who would pull nails out of smashed wood. Many sightseers who came out to see the ruins would take a piece of the debris as a souvenir. In the fall, the children of Bath returned to school, albeit without a school. Lancing schools offered to educate the children of Bath for free, but the offer was turned down. It was important for the people of Bath that their children were educated in Bath to help the community recover. Instead, the children of Bath spent the next school year on all sorts of buildings in downtown Bath, such as the grocery store, drugstore barbershop, firehouse, barns, houses, garages, offices, and even the community hall, where just a couple of months earlier it was a morgue for their classmates. Over time, a new sense of normalcy returned to the residents of Bath. On November 1st, 1927, the cornerstone for the new school was laid. In May, the class of 1928 held their commencement ceremony. On August 18th, 1928, the new school, now named the James Cousins Architectural School, was dedicated and opened. Cousins' donation to rebuild the school eventually came to $75,000. In the lobby of the new school was a bronze statue of a 10-year-old girl holding a cat to represent all the children as the face of the future, and not a memorial to the past. The statue was built with funds donated by Michigan school children who were encouraged to donate their pennies to honour their fallen peers. The Kehoe farm went back to the Price family, who wanted nothing to do with it. They donated it to the Sisters of Mercy Catholic Order. The nuns then sold it 10 years later to a farmer named Otis Van Ostrin. The first time he ploughed the land, he felt a lump in his throat, fearing he would hit a hidden bomb. In 1953, a new elementary school was built across the street from the Cousins School. After helping the community and serving the education needs of Bath for 47 years, the Cousins School was demolished on May 18, 1975. The Girl with a Cat statue was relocated to Bath High School. The white cupola, a relic from the original building, was again saved and placed in the centre of the new James J. Cousins Memorial Park on the grounds of the old school. 2 years later, just 3 days after the 50th anniversary of the disaster, the class of 1927 finally received their formal ceremony, graduating with the class of 1977. A museum opened at the Bath Middle School with artefacts from May 18, 1927, such as the flag, a broken clock that shows the exact time of the explosion, a chair, photographs, and the Girl with the Cat statue. Something that also stands out over the entrance to the museum is a large picture of Superintendent E.E. Hike, still proudly looking over his school. That's it. That's going to wrap up the Bath School Massacre story. I've got to give massive props here to True Crime Grapple writer Jim for his writing here and for bringing the story to my attention. There were so many parts in this story that I really struggled recording at because of the details and the way it was written and the way it was laid out. It was just like a horror movie. I could close my eyes and I could kind of imagine it all happening. Sadly it wasn't. This was real people, most of them children, going through something none of us would ever want to imagine. We'll be reverting back to our usual format from now on, so you won't get another episode for a couple of weeks, but work is already going on with that episode, so stay tuned. In the meantime, you can get on over to Patreon, check on out our Patreon page over there at patreon.com/truecrimegrapple, and consider a pledge of any amount. That would be absolutely awesome. Thanks everyone for the fantastic continued support. It really means a lot, and it's just, I can't speak any words to it. It blows my mind. So I look forward to bringing you a new story next time, some more true crime content. And until then, I'm Dan signing off. Stay safe out there.